welcome back to theCUBE. I'm John Furrier, host of theCUBE here in our Palo Alto studios. We're talking about the CMO summits. These are the leaders in the CMO area, marketing area around how AI is changing and transforming the world in combination with the NYSE wired community. Martina Trucco is here, the CMO of AtBay. Martina, great to see you on this side of theCUBE. Usually we see you at the events.
That's right, first time for me. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I was super excited that you're coming on because it's the CMO Leader Summit, and we've had many conversations off camera around how do you use organic, how do you use social, how do you use data, how do you get content out there? I mean, you've touched many things that CMOs do to drive engagement and sales.
That's right. That is the name of the game, actually. Like, I think not enough people realize that for the CMO, job number one is revenue. You know, everybody likes to talk about brand, but the reason brand is important is because of revenue. And the reason a really good connection with the go-to-market team is important is because of revenue. Like, that's why we're here, right? It's the revenue, as I like to say. So I think that's always like a great place to start, is to remind ourselves, like, what are we doing here, right? Like, what is our purpose?
And I have so many horror stories that people share with me around the ROI. We have to manufacture numbers and just fake it up here, and then we're good. We have ROI. Well, what's the sales increase, right? At the end of the day, the scoreboard is what's on the scoreboard is sales.
Right. The business's objectives are marketing's objectives. Everything else is below the line. Right?
I got to ask you, so one of the things that's coming up in the CMO Summit is that interdisciplinary skills at the CMO level, whether it's the CMO or the team working together, becomes critical, because now you're starting to see more holistic campaigns that are less one and dones. You go to an event, you stand up a booth, you shut it down, someone else takes over, digital's a separate department. I mean, this is all kind of changing. What's your take on the ability to have the kind of a diverse, interdisciplinary skill set?
I mean, it's a must-have for sure. Like, and I think part of your job as a CMO is first to know, like, what kind of CMO are you? What kind of a marketing executive are you? What do you always want to be T-shaped, I think, right? You know, so you need to be good at overseeing everything, but usually you've come up through a couple of areas that you were really strong. And so knowing what does this company need from you, and then what do you bring to the table? And then so that also tells you who are the people that you need around you, because you need people that are even better than you are to have an amazing team. And that thing that you said about actually having everyone not sort of siloed in the marketing department, I just think is more critical.
I love the T superpower kind of metaphor, because you have to have that kind of holistic view, but also you have to have a superpower. So two questions. What is your T? Okay, and then how do people figure out their T? How do we align? Sometimes you get lost in the swimming through all the mechanisms, and some people may take their eye off the prize.
Lots of frameworks, right?
So what's your T, and then how do people understand? Well, first of all, your last name begins with T.
That's right.
So that's good. So what is your T, and how do people figure it out?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, a couple of things that I joke around about also, that I'm a marketer by accident. I started out in strategy and portfolio management. And so for me, what that meant was I always had a really strong connection to the product and working with product teams. And so that, combined with having a lot of experience building technology brands, for me, what that really has meant is that I'm really strong in brand and thought leadership, but also like the product marketing fundamentals that make for really, really good storytelling, right? And I think that's really different than someone who may have come up from like a performance marketing culture where they were super deeply invested in, rigorously building these campaigns that are driving revenue. And so I think that part of your ability to figure out what you're great at is, one, I mean, what do you love doing as a marketer? Because I think that's the best way to have a great time at work. But also a lot of it comes from the experience that you've built up over your career. And I think for marketers, it's those who have come up in the profession have really typically had, one or a few paths where they've got that deep experience, and that really helps you, have that area that what you're working on.
Martina, is there kind of like a persona of T's, like you mentioned performance marketing? If I'm a CEO, I want to know who I'm working with, so I'm interviewing or talking to folks. How do you put these into buckets, and if you can? I mean, everyone's kind of different, everyone's kind of got their own kind of thing, but is there a categorical, like performance marketing is pretty obvious. You know who those people are because they're good at what they do, performance-based, growth hacking.
You know certainly like what they're good at, but even within there's a lot of specialization. And I think the question that you asked is such a fundamental question that CEOs really need to think about when they are hiring a CMO. And especially here in the Bay Area where we have so many kind of hyper-growth companies, the person that you need if you're hiring a CMO for a Series A rapidly scaling company is really different than the type of person that you need to run a company that is, D or E and is like now kind of getting ready to go public, right? And so I think you first need to look at what is the company stage? Where are you on that growth journey? What does the company need? What kind of company are you? It's really different if you're, B2C versus B2B, right? And so I think looking at what you need as a company, and then you kind of figure out that match, and you say, if you're trying to do a big play and you're trying to create a category, you need a CMO who has like deep experience in thought leadership and figuring out how to build category, right? And then again, even within those performance marketers, you want to look in there and see, what have they really focused on? Is it, account-based marketing, or have they really focused on B2C campaigns? Because that's a completely different skill set.
Would you put people in the categories like, okay, performance marketing, brand? You have brand
Definitely,
folks.
yep.
What are other categories that you would
product marketers? I think would be
someone?
Yeah, product marketing is definitely, I think, one of those other really like areas that you can be really T-shaped in, where you've been riding shotgun throughout your career with those product teams, bringing something to market, doing that messaging and positioning, and so I think those are kind of your big domain areas.
I was talking to a guest yesterday who was part of the program, and he was saying, for startups, you might not want to hire a full-blown CEO because your strategy, the T there is get the beachhead, which is product-led, because very product-focused, because the value proposition is what's going to entice the transaction, the sale. So
Absolutely.
Marketing the value proposition is very much a product marketing thing.
It is.
And then once you get like your Series C funding, then you can scale. Then it's more of a scaling question. So take me through that nuance, but explain the difference between, for the folks watching, that it's a much different world if you're a startup from Series A to Series C and then Series C to public offering.
That's right. I mean, I think brand is definitely something that you build over many years, and then you reap the rewards, right? You harvest the seeds that you were able to sow, many years later. And so you can't ignore it from the beginning, but I do think you're spot on in that in the early days, getting validation from the market on the product is critical, right? And so the positioning of the product and getting that across is huge. And I think a lot of times, what starts out being your brand strategy there is really about kind of positioning the company and often about positioning sort of the executive and the mission, right? And that usually goes a long way because you don't have as many proof points, right? Everybody's sort of kind of going on belief in those early stages, right? Until you start to see that flywheel going. And then I think as you go later stages, to your point, what's really critical is starting to specialize the team for scale. So like that's something that for me, when I made the transition from being at big companies where, we've known each other since my HP and Hewlett Packard Enterprise days, to getting the startup bug, that's where you realize when you go to a team instead of 150 people where maybe you've got 15 or 20, what you really want to do as you're moving that team and growing them is figuring out where do you bring in those specialists now to build out those functions where maybe you had people who were generalists who were playing a bunch of different positions. And I think that's the big shift from the earlier stages to getting ready to kind of be that, professional world-class team that you want to build towards.
Team formation is critical. I love that point. I had to ask you about the structural change. AI is going to be coming in. It's here.
It's here.
It's going to get accelerated. So we'll get into some of the things on your vision, how you see it unfolding in the tactical way. But alignment with executives is critical. You're starting to see coalitions where, security, we saw this in security when we've talked about this off camera. Security's kind of been below the line, but then recently, obviously in many years, it's come up. It's a boardroom issue. Marketing is kind of below the line a little bit in some companies, then it's becoming up the line. So building a coalition with the CEO or CFO, how do you see those relationships form? They're different in different companies, but like, if it's a CMO with the CFO, maybe it's an ROI equation. So again, back to sales seems to be the theme. What structural alignment do you see the CMO changing or doubling down on? And then how do you look at the silo piece of like departments and things like that nature?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to what I said in the beginning, which is it's all about the revenue. And so when you look at that, that means that the go-to-market has to be a shared objective. And so the CMO and the chief revenue officer have to be in lockstep, right? To say, okay, this is the goal that we have. As the marketing lead, what do I need to deliver to you when it comes to pipeline? What do you need in terms of being able to then convert that? And then also the thing that's overarching all of it, which I think sometimes we can forget, is the customer is the through line through all of it, right? And so if you think about that entire life cycle of the customer, once you've acquired that customer, marketing's job is also to, help retain that customer, remind them of the value that the company has delivered to them. But all of that is always in service of what are the business objectives, right? When it comes to, I think, there's all different kinds of executives out there. I think, I've always felt luckiest when I've had a CFO who is also a really communications and marketing minded CFO, because then those conversations are incredibly clear. They're incredibly straightforward. When you get someone that has that like clear dialogue with you, and then it's less about trying to justify numbers on a spreadsheet, and it's really always coming back to what are the business objectives? What do we need to invest to get there? What do we know is going to be the outcome of this? And let's go do it.
It's the shared scoreboard, customers, customer retention, revenue, all drives the number. Everything else is kind of like underneath. I want to ask you about AI coming into the workflows. So obviously marketing is a great vertical where there's great use cases. Writing blog posts, doing copy, ChatGPT, everyone started using it. But now you're starting to see a more operational integration, around the intellectual property of the workflows and the data. So real time becomes big. So you're starting to see more automation and reduced heavy lifting, but now the role of marketing becomes more of an operator. You're lever pulling and pushing buttons. How do you see that unfolding in the marketing areas, and what is the disruptive enablement? Disruptive is the key word, because it's going to disrupt.
It's going to disrupt, and I'll tell you, like, my hot take on this is that I think the CRM systems of today and the systems of record that we have invested so much in are going to be obsolete in a couple years because of AI agents. I just think that, like, there's actually a really interesting take that a lot of people have been looking at, which is Klarna came out a few months ago and talked about how they had gotten rid of Salesforce and then Workday because they trained their AI agents kind of against that entire, corpus of data, and then they built internal systems to, kind of handle all of that. And if you think about that, where today you can ask in a very natural way to an LLM, what it was the sales in, the Southwest region last quarter, you needed to build an entire system to do that before. You don't need that anymore. And so I think that is the thing that is going to be kind of crazy in marketing, because so many of us have invested, again, our entire careers in understanding how to build a marketing automation stack, how to tune that thing so that it sings and you can run your campaigns, you know what's happening. And I think this is the next big thing that's coming for us.
Well, I've been using the martech stack as a piñata all week because it's a lot you can pound that all day long and take swings at it.
We love to hate it.
Because, there's double sides to that coin, right? Because there's data in there. So the question is, are we extracting that data? Are the agents overlaying on top?
Right.
Can I get value, right, out of that data? And then the cost for that. So, I can see the buy build kind of philosophy of, hey, I'm paying X to this vendor. I can just code away and then have the interface be more natural for my users. So the martech stack has been this legacy set of mechanisms. Data becomes the critical piece in all this, and the workflows. So martech stacks has been, classic. I've talked to CMO, said, hey, my first year in the job, I'm going to get in there, I'm going to establish the martech stack. I got my Series B funding.
I mean, sometimes that's what you need to do, right? You need an engine inside the car.
So what is that? How do people deal with the current engine? They go, okay, I'm racing now on the track, and the other car's better. The competition has a better engine and better tuned vehicle.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think, to your point, the data is ultimately like the thing that you're working towards. And so, if you're building the martech stack today, maybe you're going to build with what's out there today, and they're good solutions. But I think what's critical is to make sure that you know what it is that you need to know. What kind of data do you need to bring in to enrich kind of what you need to know about your customers? What does sales need, right, to enrich their outreach, and capturing all of that, capturing all the signal and the buyer intent through your particular sales process, I think is the most important thing. And then will the technologies that actually are in there that help you leverage that data and turn it into insights or turn it into campaigns that you execute, will those change? Absolutely. Where I do think where AI is going to make a really interesting difference in terms of the value is, I think companies that are adding value are going to be the ones that help democratize this for a non-technical consumer, right? Again, if you look at that example where we talked about Klarna, that there's an entire engineering team in-house, right, that is doing that. For a Series B company where the decision is build your product or build a martech stack, it's very clear that you should be investing in the product, right? You focus on your core. So a company that comes in and gives you value in terms of kind of taking away that complexity and making it a little bit more democratized for a non-technical user, I think there's a ton of value in that, in being able to kind of spread this around to companies.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. This has come up on other interviews where some previous guests have been saying, and I brought up, hey, the big enterprises, like the big banks, and they're like, no, it's not about the big companies, it's the ones in the middle that are most vulnerable on security, for instance. In marketing, the same kind of thing applies, where it's like, they don't have the big budgets. So
everything has to work harder.
Yeah, so that's an opportunity. So how do you see them developing AI? How should a growing company, and let me rephrase, what would your advice be if you were the CMO of, say, a Series B company has to establish operations, number one. The second one is, I'm a growth company, I got to grow. And then the existing, I'd say enterprise, big enterprise, but not like the super brand, big budgets, but they have a lot of inertia. So startups, you're the CMO of a startup, growth, and then established company. What do you do?
Let's see. Well,
with AI.
That's a tall prescription.
We have 10 minutes.
We can break it down in 10 minutes. But you know, I mean, ultimately, I think what it comes down to is today. I think a lot of the value is in augmenting the team that you've got, right? And so first, you have to come back to you got to know what it is that you're working on. But I think when it comes to things like using AI in a really useful way to help you augment your content creation, to help slice and dice, or as I like to say, you know, we joke about it in my team, you know, you carve the content turkey, right? Baked a great turkey, you know, you made a great turkey, you got to slice it up in lots of ways, so you have leftovers the next day too. You know, AI is really good at helping you make that happen. And just doing it a lot faster. And so I'll give you a really good example, which is super fun. We had done a piece last year on financial fraud, which is like the #1 cybercrime right now based on all of our research. And so we did a whole piece on like, here's these things that you need to know, and here's how to protect your company. And then so for the holidays, we're like, can we do something fun? You know, when we gave it to the AI that we're using on content, we said, rewrite this from Santa's perspective, right? How does Santa keep the North Pole safe from financial fraud? And then of course they rewrote it about, you know, checking the vendor for the reindeer, you know, feed, and you know,
supply chain.
Exactly, and Mrs. Claus's supply chain for the cookies, right? And that's the kind of thing that it's lighthearted and fun, and so it maybe wouldn't be worth it if you only have a couple of people who are working on all these things. But AI can really accelerate you getting there. That one's really a little bit frivolous, but we've had lots of great
That's enjoyable, that's entertaining, but also it might not be the most strategic to sales, but it actually hits your targeted customer in a way that's clever and innovating. But it's kind of part of the holistic program.
It absolutely is, and that's kind of where that balance comes back to, where we talked about, you know, brand is a thing, an affinity that you build over many years. These are the touch points that build that as well. And so I think, you know, for an early stage company, figuring out how to be able to do a lot of things at the same time, AI can really augment your team and help you do that. You know, I think as you start to grow, again, some of the things that I think are really exciting are things like, for example, when you look at advertising, you know, how do things like the video AI generators or the image AI generators come into play to help your creative team and your design team just move so much faster? You know, if I think about the hours that my design teams and I have spent looking at stock photography to find like the perfect shot because we didn't have time to do a shoot, and what, you know, how can we get this for this website that conveys this idea? It's that time spent is being radically reduced, and that is a huge efficiency for the team, and that unlocks your ability to do, you know, a lot more A/B testing, a lot more, you know, piloting of campaigns. And I think that's the key thing for companies who are scaling, is being able to move through that experimentation. Yes, the agility and the time saved and being able to do that is second to none.
You brought up a great point about time savings and also the steps it takes to do stuff. And if you look at the value of AI, if you look at reducing friction, but reducing the steps it takes to do something, making it easier is key. You know, we've worked together over the past decade in multiple companies you've been involved in. Content marketing, you know, we love content marketers. We're in the content business.
Absolutely.
But there's a new way to engage, right? So what's your take on companies that who have been doing content marketing, maybe slow, not getting it right, but now have an opportunity with AI to kind of reconstitute a workflow or establish a new team? What would you do as a content strategist for a marketer saying, hey, you know, this is what we want to do for the next 5 years?
I mean, I think it comes down to the core of it has to be like the perspective that you have. You need a POV. Ideally, you've got something to teach people. I fundamentally believe, education is the thin edge of the wedge when it comes to thought leadership and content marketing, right? And if you give someone something of value, you teach them something, they're going to remember your brand, and so you've already done the right thing. You don't need to beat them over the head with it. So I think the core of it is really understanding what is it that you're going to tell people, what is valuable to them, and then once you do that, I think that's the nugget where your people and their brain power need to be operating on. And then there's so much of that that then can be transformed into, all these things that appear across like the content, the multiverse, of content. And that's where AI really, I think, augments the team. And so, in our case, we do a lot of original research in terms of security risks and, cybercrime trends and things like that. And so that really forms the core of it. And then we say, okay, how can we, after we've done that work, we've done that research, we have that perspective, how do we then bring that to life, contextualize it for a security audience versus a business audience versus, an insurance audience? And it really depends on who you're talking to.
And the objectives you got, mind share, nurturing, cognitive dissonance.
Yep. And then, you break it down and you really think about what level in the, in the funnel are you? How are you doing a very high level thought leadership piece to build category? Are you doing something that connects it to the brand? Are you making it then connected to the product or something more transactional? You have to think about the strategy as you build all those things together, but it always comes down to that nugget of what's that kind of idea that you have and that point of view that you're going to teach people.
Martina, thank you for coming on theCUBE and sharing your perspective on our CMO Leaders Series. What are you doing and why, and making it go faster?
It's been a lot of fun, John. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for coming on. Okay, we are here in Palo Alto for theCUBE, CMO Leaders with the NYSE Wired community. Brian Bauman, the founder, and team are here. Big reception going on with 100 CMOs tonight. We'll see you later. Thanks for watching.